You are almost there. You're almost there. You are there. Nick, you're live.
Hey, welcome to the Tolkien Project for a Tuesday afternoon. I think we will be jumping into chapter 5 here, and we are going to talk some Dark Goblin Stalkers as our ranger character, Walker, is going to leave the inn and take himself off. And I wonder if this is well, we did. Did we hear the Medusa's voice last time?
We did a little bit. The creepiness of the juxtaposition of how sweet Nicole actually is, and then how sinister she sounds. I'm not going to spoil it.
Yeah, exactly. In the real world of.
Oh, you cut out on me. Oh, I got disconnected. So now I'm here by myself with my cool little glasses on so I can see the drawing stuff. Oh, he's back. He's back, ladies and gentlemen. And he's muted. Are you there, brother?
My phone decided to interrupt the podcast.
Well, you're back now. Please continue.
Exactly. So, I haven't even kind of come up, it's not Middle Earth, but I'm kind of trying to come up with, well, what is this world of the Tolkien Project and, Middle World? I don't know. We will play with it. Comments in the suggestion box. Let's go ahead and run with it.
I'm running. All right, here we go. We're going to present, let's see. Share screen. I love sharing my screen. Oops, can't have that up there. Here we go. Screen, audio, and Tolkien Project, Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. The stranger the Littles had named Walker was out
Is it dead?
all around, and he could smell night, and they'd come for him.
So
the stranger took the northeastern road up out of the area around the last friendly inn. Chapter 5. The stranger the Littles had named Walker was out and into the late night with the bundle of the rucksack in one hand. He stopped in the wide courtyard and smelled the night. Beyond the heady scent of the eucalyptus trees the Littles planted in this region to protect their crops from the cruel late night and early morning frost and mist, he could smell the dust of the roads, the salt from out along the ocean, and the general aroma of things growing in the lands all around. And he could smell others out there tonight. Unclean things coming along in the dark as they were known to do. They were here, unseen, and out there in the darkness, undetectable because of their sorceries and craft. But they're all the same. By the sign in the dirt of the courtyard, he could see their trace just barely. They were crafty and careful, and they'd come close to listen to what passed beyond the great door of the dark inn. Pulling his hood over his head, Walker headed off down the lane, away from the coast and the road that ran south to the Tower of Cirith Azildor, or even north to Indolene. He moved swiftly, not bothering to cast a look back, knowing they were there in clusters, working their nets already, and seeking where they could come upon him and catch him. They were new to these lands, now that the sacred boundaries of the Black River had been violated. But as he moved fast and farther into the dark beyond the inn proper and the fields that surrounded it, each new scent of the wind confirmed to Walker what he already knew. They were here on this wilding night, and they'd come for him. The stranger took the northeastern road up out of the area around the last friendly inn. Walker moved swiftly up and along that way. Passing the last few little homes in the district, he could still see the soft glow of candlelight coming from their firelit kitchens, and knowing that the simple gentlefolk there were possibly about a late night snack, or perhaps some of the last of the winter smoked ham, a fried egg or six, and of course the hot lily they all like to make and put up for the winter from the last year's harvest. The stranger had to admit to himself that he could have used a bit of that peppery fire and a well-cooked egg, and perhaps even a fatty slice of ham. He had a long night in front of him, and if he was going to outmaneuver his pursuers in the dark wilds toward the northeast, then he was going to have to cover some rough country to come at Indolene from a direction no one suspected. And was he even going to Indolene? Perhaps the hour for the great city was too late even now that the gateways to the south were wide open. And perhaps it was best to do as Bearkiller had bade him to do now. Set to his mission this night, even though it was surest death, and there was no hunting fellowship to see it done. Those thoughts bothered Walker as he moved, shouldered the ruck, and ran one gloved hand over the leather scabbard of the sword. He gave it a slight pull, executing the barest of draws, just to make sure the blade was ready to clear leather should the fight come soon. And soon enough it would come. That was a safe bet for this night. The first rise out of the coastal valley that lay next to the small ridge of hill and the wide plains along the sea showed him the district of the Littles behind, and the wide and big moon staring down toward the sea. Out there the sea was empty and made like the armor of the elven horse by the moon. There was no silver sails of Indolene, but, and Walker's eyes were keen, there were black sails out there in the mist and out in the open too, testing the waters between the outer islands and the approaches to the harbor at Indolene. But he really only pretended to be interested in the wide moonlit sea out there tonight. Instead, he turned to survey the shadows of the trees, the draws, and the quiet places where he knew his pursuers might be waiting, threading winter's deadfall carefully to stay on his trail. The men of the North are known for their ability to run for days at a time. But now, in the dark and heading into the east, pursued by an unknown force, now was not the time to run. Running was easier to track, and the goblins were known to run for long periods too. And what if they had support of some riders, dark horse, or even wolf? The best trick now, thought Walker, who was more skilled than most at tracking and evasion within the woods, was to throw them off and move quietly away in some other direction than the one they were certain he was pursuing. There was a greater chance of losing them altogether, and if they did find his trail, Then he could set traps and deadfalls or lure them into dangerous places they might not get out of. Now he followed what the Littles did not call the old road. This was the northeastern lane, according to the Littles. It was, in all actuality, an ancient way made so by the old kings. But now, and in the long years since, it had turned to little more than a wide and winding path that would make its way in a very haphazard fashion up into the Dry Hills country and through the small hamlets, holds, and large farms of the Highland Littles who lived up that way. Walker stood for long minutes, waiting as the moon sank down toward the distant sea. Across the many roads and ways down there, among the little strawberry farms near the coast, the watch had come out to light the lanterns that lay along the roads and wide spaces between their villages, as their job had been for many generations. He could see none of his pursuers down there in the dark, but he sensed their presence all the same. He checked the dagger in just the same manner as he had the sword, and thus satisfied turned, topped the rise as fast as he could, and started down into Dry Hill country by heading down the opposite side of the large hill and down into the low hollows that lay between the rising landscapes that formed the Dry Hills area. There was nothing but late night silence, perhaps some occasional owl calling out. And then there was the wind from down along the coast as it raced quickly up into the hills, moving through the stands of oak and other clustering trees, causing them to whisper in hushed tones. That would be good. It would cover the sound of his passage once he left the road, and the shifting winds would cause all the shadows to move in the trees and underneath them, not just his. Perhaps there may even be fog later, he said to himself, though no one was about to hear. It was his way, forged by hard years on the road alone and in his investigations into all the forgotten places of the world. Often, when no one else was around, he would speak out his plans, his advantages, and the obstacles facing him, talking through it all just to hear if there was any falseness in them. This was a habit Walker had acquired from the men of the North, and his time among their scouts and warriors before he found his way among the storytellers, where talking and the telling of things became not just second nature, but a language all its own, full of so many truths. So Walker reminded himself that the fog might just come up into the low areas beneath the Dry Hills, and perhaps along old streams and creeks of the hills, following the paths of such to send its misty tendrils up a ways a little bit more. And that would be good for him against the shadows that stalked him even now. Moving in the fog would be like moving under a blanket, concealing him and allowing him to hear them blundering about in pursuit. But the fog did not come to aid Walker before he was forced to give battle against them in a lonely old hollow once called the Charring Tree Wayside, for no reason to give battle any of the Littles of these present days could ever remember, though the reason why it was named such was known to the storytellers and kept in their records and annals. The Charring Tree Wayside was a place of ancient evils, and Walker, as he moved swiftly, his road-eating stride long and relentless, cursed himself inwardly for not having thought they would be waiting for him among the crumbled, rune-laden stones of that sort of place. Such fell creatures were oft ever attracted to all the ancient evils that were ever done under the sun. It was their way, and Walker cursed himself for not having taken this into account as they closed their noose about him in the night. The hunters that faced him were moonfen goblins from out of the eastern wastes beyond the Black River itself, an area of ancient sunken kingdoms and the shattered remains of an old battle where the bones and even the broken weapons of ancient heroes and foes still lay within the mud and the vast sunken lakes of that area. Moonfen goblins were predators, more animal than sentient. The Orcish warlords used them as such. Excellent hunters, stealthy creepers. They moved like hunting wolves in packs when they needed to, and creeping snakes when they must. They were excellent at infiltrating held lands on long-range patrols deep in enemy territory, and it made sense that in the aftermath of the fall of Cirith Isildur and the ancient tower, that they would be the first ranging into these northern lands, often led by a strong leader. These Moonfen goblins had probably come north in the weeks before the Battle of Cirith Isildur as some sort of screening force, and perhaps they were not specifically sent to find Walker, but had spotted him moving slowly and steadily north after the battle. The first arrow of their attack came at the stranger out of the darkness as he entered the hollow, and it was thanks to the swiftness of his kind that he sensed its flight and reacted by throwing himself against a sturdy oak for immediate cover. The speeding arrow whipped past and off along the road. A second came, flying dark and fast in the night, and later several more slammed into the oak or began to whistle through the air all around him. The sorceries that guarded them were now broken, and he could see their foul presence revealed in the last of the spectral moonlight. Soon it would be dark, but, as has been said, he had keen eyes, and the years Walker had spent among the men and the outcasts had given him tricks and sharp eyes even for the darkest of nights. The goblin hunters had ringed the clearing at the bottom of the hollow, staying well back up along the brush and tree-covered slopes. There were 5 of them, and 5 is an evil number.
"Use me now,"
whispered the voice in Walker's mind. He ignored it and shifted the bundle under his other arm. A moment later, he drew his old blade with barely the snick it took to clear leather. He'd faced longer odds before, but no fight was ever fair or guaranteed of an outcome. There were archers, and his bow had not made the journey from the north. Instead, breaking in battle as the watch tried to hold the throughway beneath Cirith Isildur in the last hours before defeat.
"Use me now, Hessel,"
whispered the voice from within the bundle.
2 are better than 1, and I shall help you, though you are not elven kind. Turn loose my powers and strike them down, ancient man. I thirst for vengeance. Even the pitiful blood of these dark hounds long from home will do for now. Turn me loose and watch me free you of the trap you have gotten yourself into.
The voice was female. Whether elven, human, or some other race, Walker did not know. But he didn't like it. And he'd heard its siren call since being tasked with the carrying of the object in the bundle travel rug, away from the dusty crypts beneath the tower. And he'd been warned by Bearkiller and even Almandir himself. And warnings from old mountain men were to be heeded, as they say. Walker had himself learned that during many hard lessons and come to trust their wisdom in the years since, always testing it even now, always finding it true even still. The thing in his ruck called to him as he heard the shadow orcs moving about in the brush of the hollow, whispering and giggling like it was play, scrabbling and cursing in the black speech, firing their whistling bolts and seeking to move to their next cover as he quietly shifted from cover to cover, ever one step ahead of their targeting. Perhaps, thought Walker as he sought some advantage, they are not aware I possess no bow this night. If they were, then they would rush as one and try to take what I bear. Walker bent and picked up a stone. He waited for a moment, then whipped it at a noise nearby. Whether it struck home or not, that was not his intention. For a moment they stopped their firing, whistling their hunting speech and orders to one another, unsure of what the noise was and what their prey was about, even now when he was cornered down here in the dark. But with the next seconds, using their uncertain halt, Walker was already moving up on them, blades out. And as everyone knows, men make no sound when they wish not to, even if they are booted and clothed in the rough and woodlands manner of their people from ages past, just as Walker was when he came upon them in the dark, a traveler, not some emerald knight in full armor, servant of the throne of Indoline. The traveling stone he'd whipped at them had gone off through the brush, and perhaps the goblins, because these were hunters, predators, thought it was him fleeing suddenly off in a new direction. They were waiting for more sounds to confirm his flight when suddenly Walker exploded upon the first one, running that tall and lean goblin through with a simple stab of his old blade. It was done quick, which was best, and he shook the green creature covered in black greasy stripes, naked and warty from the waist up, off his blade and made quick his next attack. The weapon he wielded was a blade born in the wars across the desert wastes to the east. In the long years he'd haunted the southern lands, seeking rumors of the mission he'd been sent on long ago. It was a simple blade, no magic in it, no elven craft or even sorcery. Something forged in the cruel furnaces of the north by mighty men who worked at hot forges and heavy hammers beneath the cold shadow of snow-capped mountains on cold mornings and even colder nights. The sharp blade pushed neatly through the spindly Moon River goblin, kitted only in the barest traveling armor and carrying a darkwood bow. The horrid creature wore a gray sash across the bottom half of its twisted face, and though one ear was missing, he'd managed long ago to pierce what was left with the nub of an old, misshapen and milky pearl, the likes of which were unseen in the north. That one died gasping and kneeling. Moving swiftly forward through the dark, Walker hefted the blade and drove it through the creature's back, then pushed it out until it came straight through the goblin hunter's concave sternum. He grasped that foul-smelling one quickly with the well-worn leather glove of his other hand and smothered the cry of alert and murder the night hunter was about to give in the next instant, ignoring the whispers of
blood, blood, and goblin blood,
pleading in his mind from the thing in the ruck on his back. There were 5 here in the dark, but there was confusion now, and the goblin hunters were uncertain for a moment as he moved swiftly among them. He held the goblin close, counting the remaining and seeing they were distracted with the confusion he'd caused them. He waited for the creature to die, its stench rising up to his nostrils and mixing with the night and the sickly sweet decay of the old hollow where once much wickedness had been done long ago. The rest of the hunters were moving in the next seconds, finding themselves and calling, really whispering to one another in their vile black speech. They hissed softly to one another, some cant for counting and coordinating in battle. Guessed Walker as one in his arms began to go limp with loss of life and blood, turning to little more than dead weight now. Walker withdrew his blade, not bothering to wipe the fetid blood from it, tossed the rags of the thin, twisted corpse into a sunken carved stone, long hidden here, and moved toward his next target, a dangerous thing now among the hunters in the night, or at least for the moment. The hunting party whispered their hissing speech to one another from across the distances that separated them in their ambush, clearly angry and growing more panicked by the second as the wild man among them began to hew and cleave at them with long and deadly blade. It was a bad stroke the goblin walker chose next. The thing struck light to a ghostly green lantern and turned, illuminating the savage man suddenly and the blade just feet away and coming for it in the last instant there in the deeps of the ancient hollow. Yay! It screamed, frightened, and leaped forward suddenly, slashing at Walker with a small, cruel dagger it carried. This night hunter had placed his strung bow about his slender chest in order to work the lantern in the chaos. Though dagger faced the longer blade of the stranger, no viciousness was spared and no quarter given. The agile little goblin maintaining a deft hold on the bobbing lantern, spewing a mossy green illumination, attacked swiftly, slashing wildly to force the stranger to give ground downslope. The cuts were wicked, and had they found flesh, they would have been equally deadly, for goblin blades are oft poison. Walker's worn gray cloak caught a quick slash before he was able to parry a wicked thrust with his own rapidly deployed dagger. A moment later, he brought his old sword around in a quick arc and forced the dagger aloft and away from its defense. With the cruel little sticker out of the way, Walker withdrew his blade and plunged it forward an instant later as the orc began to call an alert of "Here!" once more. There were 2 left of this small hunting clutch now, and they came toward the lantern of the dying goblin hunter on the ground, thundering through the brush to catch the stranger in the act of sudden attack and murder. In the distance there were others, whistling their alerts to contact. Perhaps their leader One of the ones Walker had killed already had wanted the taking of the prize. They'd been sent to find this deep in enemy territory on their scout for himself. And so he had not sounded the alert. But now there were many others in the hills this long night, other bands of moonfen goblins, and so whoever ran this clutch hadn't given air to his horn to alert the nearby bands of hunters and assassins that the prey was found and run to ground. Perhaps he'd made that decision in the early moments of the battle, when the black arrows had whistled through the night, and that leader had hoped for an easy kill and soft plunder, returning to their masters with the thing that was sought, or keeping it if he found it lovely enough, perhaps. But now, with 3 clearly dead, and 2 calling by shrill whistle for more, Walker presumed their leader dead, and for a moment, amid the fight, he sensed his chance to get away, to hit hard, and then fade away like some ghost that never was there. Men are ever cruel and tricky in battle. Then there was a third moving fast through the tangle of the old and unkempt hollow, and this one surely was the leader, if only because his armor and bulk were much more than the others in the shadows of the night. The survivors of the hunting party he'd fallen upon attacked as one, as the other 2 hunters joined the leader against Walker. The leader swept a blade out savagely, raised a ram's horn, and blew, alerting one and all in the host of goblins out that wilding night that the quarry had been run to ground finally. One blast would let the others know the prey had been found. A second would tell them and their ears where to come. The swarthy, bandy-legged creature with a bald and scarred scalp and missing fingers sucked in another lungful of air, preparing the second blast to alert the location of the flight. And then a dagger from the man appeared dead center in his chest, flung from out of the night, coming from the battle, along the hollow floor, his fellow goblin hunters, mere whirling shadows in the battle against the night wraith of the man. The stranger, a thing of darkness in the night, seeming more so than ever to them, had flung his dagger to stop the alert, and the goblin leader died just watching it appear in his chest, above the old armor he wore. It struck with such force that the wind was knocked from the goblin leader, and he let go of the horn as he died right there. Perhaps, thought the leader, as darkness took him, unable to gain even the slightest bit of air, perhaps the whispering voice in the bundle was the thing they'd been sent for. And then he was dead, rolling down the slope among the old leaves and waiting spiders, coming to rest against a cracked, rune-covered cut stone that offered no comfort on this night. With 3 dead, 2 should have been fine to deal with. But the wild man called Walker found himself challenged against the 2 hunters, who brought out their curved little blades no bigger than a troll's dagger. Perhaps these 2 had been the up-and-comers in the hunting pack, those who'd one day challenged the pack warlord for supremacy of the tribe, the mates in the mean hoard of the stolen gold and captured gems the orcs of Moonfen regarded as wealth and status, buried out in the high cliffs beneath the waters of the Dead Sea in the wastes, their ancestral home, for reasons not even they knew. Perhaps these were those. Walker's storyteller's mind wove that story because there was a story to everything, and everything was a story. Still, that did not stop his parries or opportunistic thrusts to gain advantage as their steel rang out in the night and the horns of the other hunting parties cried out in dark joy. He may have caught one in the arm, given a good slice because there was blood underfoot and spraying about as the flight continued. But the battle was too close and too hectic, switching ground and seeking advantage one moment to the next for him to see which shadow he'd wounded. And still, the thing whispering in his mind hadn't stopped. And if anything, it had grown to distract, demanding now to be used for that which it was made for.
Chaos, blood, death.
Walker ignored these whispers, not wanting to pay mind, as he fended off the 2 attackers along the bottom of the ancient hollow, never minding he'd lost his dagger to the dead goblin leader, blowing the call for help, or how imminent that help was and coming soon, mere minutes perhaps. And then, in just a brief instant, the blink of an eye, really, the battle suddenly shifted. The first goblin landed his blade deep in Walker's side, but pulled it free in the next. The wound was a silent scream that was both hot and cold in the same unending moment of pain. Walker's lore-minded mind knew this was not good. Perhaps a Morgul blade, he thought, as the offending orc danced away, cackling gutturally and clicking its broken teeth in some arcane and enigmatic meaning. The other foe sensed its moment with the wounded man's back presenting and struck out with all or nothing blow to land his own blade in the back of their enemy and join the kill. But this was a mistake, and where the brief fight suddenly changed and ended abruptly. Wounded though a man may be, they are a deadly race all the same, able to divide their mind away from the things of this life and to concentrate on the task and purpose. Pleasure or pain, the men of long ago were able to endure the hardships of the dark years and the long crossing through the frozen nethers by putting their minds and needs elsewhere despite the harsh circumstances. Perhaps the elves of Indolene had lost that trick, trading it in for the fineries of civilization, eschewing pain over pleasure. But men had not. Walker's path had been much different than both men and elves, and his life a return in many respects to the old ways much sneered about in the Emerald Courts. So it was nothing for him to simply ignore the fatal wound and swing wide as he heard the suddenly foolish headlong rush of the other goblin, smelling blood and excited for the kill. The old blade of the savage man bit deep into the goblin's skull and came away from the brain and bone matter. The cut wasn't clean, but it was enough. The other goblin, who'd been backed off to enjoy his Victorian cowardly slice, was surprised to see the deadly arc of the blades take off the head of his comrade and then come for him in the same moment as the man turned his pivot into a tremendous, sure-footed rush across the treacherous deadfall of the old hollow. Giving ground, backpedaling, the lean goblin threw up both its black claws, one still holding its own blade, to fend off the furious attack. But this was too little to avail as it ramped home and pinned the slime dead against the trunk of the old twisting oak. Run through its tiny black heart. The last thing the cruel goblin hunter heard was the sudden snap of the man's blade against the solidness of the oak as the warrior pushed it through, having a bad angle and revealing some old fault within the forged metal, waiting for just such a tragic moment to occur. In the silence that followed, Walker backed away, holding the hilt of the broken weapon he'd borne long in his travels. Hearing the laugh of the whispering voice hidden within his worn ruck turned to a full-throated satisfaction of a seductress scorned. The voice of the thing in the bundle. Gray wisps of smoke crawled out from its knotted coverings. Walker could feel his own blood running down his side and along his leg, into his boot. But there wasn't any time for this. In the distance, he could hear the others, the other night hunters coming for him, calling one to another out there in the late night, coming to do the evil the horn had called them for, coming for him.
And there it is.
Finally, some combat.
My boy got stabbed. Not cool. Are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear
cool.
me?
Yes.
That's what happens when you play with sharp sticks.
It really is true.
Yeah, I got stabbed last weekend.
What?
Yeah,
because of the you were at the seminar.
I was at the Sharp Thing seminar, and I didn't get stabbed. I got repeatedly faux stabbed, meaning I was killed several times over, learning how to kill others several times over. But the trainer, Steve Tarani, he was showing me one of his new blades that he has coming out, and he goes, "Here, try it." And I put my hands around it because it's sort of a belt dagger.
Uh-huh.
And then I adjusted my grip, and I'm like, "Oh, this is a good grip," because the first grip wasn't working for me. And then I squeezed, and I'm like, "Oh shit, my my index finger is on the blade." And then he's like, and then he was doing something. He looks over, and I'm like bleeding. Or he goes, "Here," "Hold it like this." I go, "Oh no, I'm kind of bleeding all over your blade. I'll just go wash this off." Loser.
That's how it happens. Oh
yeah,
my
exactly.
goodness. Yeah,
but my miraculous Wolverine-like powers of healing have turned it into a nice little scar. and
Nice.
I'm good to go. Yeah.
In the story, we find out that Walker's blade isn't exactly a blade of legend.
Yeah, and we'll kind of yes, Aragorn had Anduril, which is this legendary broken blade, and like I said, always in Forgotten Rune, we kind of play around with the concepts, and so here we've broken the blade, but we've kind of talked a few little hints about what the men are all about. Maybe the men are more like the elves in Tolkien. They're more connected to the wilderness. They haven't forgotten the old ways. The elves seem to be more civilized and possess the cities in this one. And the fact of the matter is if you're men and you're living out in the woods, you haven't engaged in the great sorceries. You've been working on sort of your strength and your stalking and your tracking and your survival skills, and you've manufactured a few weapons and things like that. But this is not the typical blade of renown. It's not even a blade of renown. It's just a blade that you use. It's just your good old Glock, and he done busted it, which happens in a fight sometimes. You bust your weapon, but more importantly, he's been stabbed by a blade that he suspects of possibly being a Morgul blade. We can throw back to a Tolkien, and I believe it's Pippin, who is stabbed by a Morgul blade by a wraith in the Barrow Wight in the Barrow Downs when they go in there, and that plagues him for quite a while after that.
Yeah, poison. You just talking about Steve.
Or no, it's Frodo. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's Frodo.
Frodo gets stabbed. Yeah.
But you were saying like the poison, and then you were just talking about Steve Tirani, the culture that produced a lot of the martial arts that originally trained that gentleman were heavy in the use of poison, most notably from certain grades of fish.
Yes.
And they have this blade called a kris, or sometimes called a keris. Yes. And it's a wavy snaked blade, but what they used to do is on the outer edges of the wave, they would put this poison on it. So if you got nicked, even a glancing blow, you were in trouble.
Yeah. It's probably not the fugu fish, but something like that. And and then we go back to Dungeons and Dragons, and usage of poison was considered evil. But what you find in most tribes, which is where we get the use of poison, is poison was a combat multiplier for them. So there was no good or evil for it. Like, what's the difference in killing someone with poison as opposed to killing somebody who's trying to kill you in a fight? And there's no such thing as a fair fight. There's no such thing. So you do everything you can to get to be the guy who goes back to the hut and gets to sleep on the skins that night. And that is as old as human history. But it's fun because we get into these goblins, which you are doing an outstandingly beautiful. You said this was your wheelhouse. You said, when I said, what do we want to do today? I said, goblin stalker.
Me and
this
goblins
is my jam.
Yep. So
tell us how you got acquainted with goblins, or like what drew, like some people like to draw, like girls like to draw horses. Everybody knows that. I knew a kid in high school, and his thing was dragons and castles. But Walt Robillard, he said, "You know what? I'm the goblin master." Why?
I don't know. They were easy to draw. Usually when you saw the art, it was very angular, and very easy to draw. It was very wispy and stick figure like. So in the beginning, that was kind of easy for me. And surprisingly, in my youth, a lot of reference for me to find goblin art, because it was all over Spider-Man. You had
that's true, Green Goblin,
Green Goblin.
Yeah. So that's why your goblin has some delts going on
a little bit.
He's got some good tries going on.
We're going to cover those in a second.
This is a goblin who knows his way around the goblin gym.
Yeah, so we're going to be changing up in a second, because this, aside from the hood, he's got this like wraparound thing right here, which is kind of like, kind of like a shamag or like a traveling scarf, and then we're going to switch that out. And because the other side of this is going to be some like ripped up chainmail.
Nice. And so these were stalkers. These were light scout troops, something which you are acquainted with. What did you think of their tactics?
I actually really enjoy this chapter. I like the way they move. I like the fact that they're not the typical like in today's excuse me, in today's a lot of the way that goblins are portrayed. They're portrayed as these little cackling. You ever see that?
Idiots.
Yeah. What was that? That movie back in the day, Critters. It was like these little, like, ferocious balls of like carnivorous aliens, and it was like part of that like whole Gremlin scene that went on for a little while. That's how a lot of the art and a lot of the way that they're portrayed in popular culture now. And like, goblins were, I mean, when we were coming up, goblins were sinister, these like sinister, sneaky, very lithe hunters. And, I think that came across very, very well in the chapter, and then, it's like, oh crap, there's men about.
Yeah, I liked Tolkien's, especially the original animated Hobbit. Which was, they weren't goblins, they were hobgoblins. Yeah, and someone did a miniatures run on those, and that made me want to take up miniatures painting. Because like it was funny because they were sort of big and fat. They had big jaws, and they were like scary looking. They weren't goofy and that kind of stuff. And then I look back on them, because I've looked back on them recently, and they have cat fangs.
Yes.
And they would have like saliva dripping between the cat fangs, and they were like, so the difference, the goblin is sort of the light scout. The hobgoblin is, in military terms, you kind of look at like the orcs are more like straight infantry. The hobgoblins kind of turn out to be almost more like skirmishers, more like sort of like close support artillery. They're gonna be the guys that are throwing a bunch of spears. They're gonna be working bows and everything like that, but they're not ready to get into a stand-up fight again. And I think Tolkien kind of reflects that, because the hobgoblins freak out.
Yeah.
At least they don't feek out, which they probably did. They freak out when suddenly an elven blade gets involved. And so that tells you that goblins have learned sort of like a long history of like hand to hand with people, with elves, or anyone wielding anything close to an elf is not good for us. But then you eventually arrive at the orcs, who are really, your sturdiest troops, and then the Uruk-hai, which they're sort of half human special forces, and these guys don't flinch on a blade. And it's interesting. And then also you get into Mordor, and the goblins there are pretty nasty, and they don't mind like skirmishing with the orcs and stuff like that. It is kind of funny how Tolkien got down the gradients of troops. It was very interesting to me.
Eric Johnson was wondering, hey, I thought goblins had warts.
They can. This one sees a dermatologist and
has a gym membership. Oh, we lost Nick. He'll be back. So yeah, so far this is our little goblin dude. He's got a bow. Oh, there's Nick. And there he is.
Yeah, the interwebs are weird today. They keep kicking me around and stuff like that. It's bogus. This Ukraine war's got to end. The orc war's got to end.
Right.
Yeah, but what I like about the orcs too is when we look at Tolkien again, we've got Gondor, who's going to. It seems like they're going to use horse attacks. They're going to use a lot of spears. I think Gondor ends up using bows and arrows too when they hunt. Rohan and those things. Gondor, on the other hand, seems to just use a lot of swords.
Yeah.
But what I like about goblins and the orcs too is like, it's funny, they're carrying everything that they need. They've got a dagger, they've got a small light bow, and they've got a sword. And they've usually got a shield. And it's like, and that's more like the modern military, you know, like you're going to have 3 or 4 different weapons, not just this one and stuff like that. So I've always, you know, like I've always been a big fan of the sort of like fun kind of, you know, side of evil troops and things like that. I always thought that was cool. I remember kind of wanting to be an Uruk-hai when I first read it, and like running to school and being like, this is what they do. They kind of run everywhere. That's kind of cool. You know, now, man, I don't got the cardio for that.
Did you enjoy the animated Lord of the Rings?
Oh, the Ralph Bakshi one scared the hell out of me. I loved it. I mean, it's weird that you only really get up to doesn't it only go as far as the beginning of Two Towers?
They actually split it. So they only did 2 of they did it as a duology instead of the trilogy. And they split it like all the way up to the Two Towers is like one, like half of the Two Towers is one, and then the Return of the King, Two Towers, and then the Return of the King is another.
So exactly, and another company did it. I think Rankin Bass came in and did the second part.
Yeah,
I don't think Bakshi did the first part. But
like
it is funny because Bakshi did a lot of rotoscope too, which is interesting. I
always enjoyed the singing, where there's a whip, there's a way, and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, that was great. You know, those they are just as equally as fun as the Peter Jackson movies, which I have no complaint with. I enjoyed those and everything like that, and even, you know, the Crazy Hobbit and things like that. You know, that was ridiculous, but it was just kind of fun.
Yeah.
But I don't think I'll be opting in on this latest thing, and that's why we're doing this. Absolutely. And having fun, not bad mouthing anybody's art. But it's a fun little chapter that we've gotten involved in here, and now we're kind of getting into the story, and we're seeing some things. And I think we're going to meet in the next chapter next week a very interesting person that seems to be over at the Stack a fan favorite already, because we're chapters ahead over there. And you can just listen to the audio recording if you want to subscribe, or you can read it. And now we're so far ahead, we're kind of getting into a little siege. A cozy siege is what I like to call it. Maybe that's what I'll name that chapter. But I think people like the little stuff, you know,
they're
fried
just
egg.
Fun.
And,
they really are.
Yeah.
You know, and I got to tell you, I'm always hungry after I hear about the littles.
I know. Food's such a major thing. You know what I mean? And good food is a lot of fun. That's the fun part. Since I'm having so many internet problems, we'll call it here tonight. Cool. And we'll tell you that we will be back next Tuesday. Today is the launch of Strange Company 2, Voodoo Warfare on audiobook. So if you enjoy the sound of my voice, well, then you'll like the narrator of that, Christian Ryan Grant, even better, because he reads both the first Strange Company book and the second Strange Company book, Voodoo Warfare. And people who've read these delightful tomes say that they're very enjoyable. They're like a Hobbit cozy, if the Hobbit cozy was set in Warhammer 40K. And there was a lot of violence and coffee and cigarettes and space marines.
And ruck hobos.
And ruck hobos.
Don't forget the ruck hobos.
And weird, dark sort of wizards that happen to be soldiers.
I loved Strange Company 2. The sinister of it, you know, like the galaxy and the world is a very dangerous, you know, like it's very dangerous and very self-serving, and if you're not careful, you will be enslaved to do something you really don't want to do.
Yeah, the Strange Company universe is a very warts and all universe, and it's a very matter of fact. And I kind of think we're kind of at that place right now in our lives where, like, the people when we look at the super rich and the super powerful and things like this, and these, we're not getting political here. I mean, these are things that Tolkien talked about and stuff like that. There were the Sam Gamgees, and there were the people, moving the chessboard around and making decisions that affected normal people. And Tolkien's final summation is mine too, is that the real nobility is in us, the little people, the average people, the plucky gardener who goes off to war and things like that. But what you see in the Strange Company universe is this massive callousness towards ordinary people out there on the line, or just living their lives, or trying to pursue life, liberty, and happiness out there in the galaxy on some planet. Then you have these major corporations and these people who call themselves the monarchs, because they're sort of these elite humans, and they come along and say, all your stuff is ours. And there's really not a damn thing that you can do about that. And, as usually things go like that, a bunch of people decide, well, we don't necessarily agree with that. And then circumstances have a way, if you look at the grand scope of history, of undoing tyrants, from Hitler to Sauron, after a while, what you really see in the big struggle is that ordinary people get tired of other people's crap. And then they show up at the gates of Mordor and knock them down and haul you out into the light and chop off your
head. That's the way to do it. So
that is
next week for chapter 6.
Yep. Yeah. Let's do it.
Excellent. And Jason Hayes says, Chief Cook for the win.
Chief Cook for the win. I love Cook. He's based on a real person.
Oh my goodness. Jason Hayes also says, while I was just a lowly paratrooper, not a ranger, I always carried a large combat knife and a few smaller ones.
Hey, Sky Soldiers for the win. You know what I mean? At least you weren't a dirty leg.
We don't judge much. So we want to thank everybody for coming out and checking out this latest installment of the Tolkien Project. Don't forget to go out, check out, if you look at the screen, nickcole.substack.com. You can get all these chapters ahead of them going on YouTube. And don't forget to pick up Voodoo Warfare, Strange Company Book 2.
Good night, everyone.